The boardroom of Atlas Corporation was a shrine to power, suspended high above the city in a glass tower that gleamed like a monument to greed, its long polished mahogany table stretching like a battlefield where fortunes were gambled and futures were destroyed, where men in tailored suits and women draped in designer silks postured as if they were emperors of an empire that could never fall, yet beneath the sheen of success there was rot, hidden in spreadsheets and offshore accounts, and as the executives gathered for their Monday meeting, sipping bitter coffee and pretending their nervous chatter was confidence, a man slipped into the room unnoticed, a man with no suit, no Rolex, no title, just a faded blue uniform and a mop bucket that squeaked faintly across the marble floor, a sound so out of place in that temple of arrogance that it immediately drew smirks and whispers from the board members, who turned their heads with a collective disdain that only those cushioned by money could perfect, and someone, nobody quite remembered who started it, snickered, "Careful with the marble, mop boy, it's worth more than your life," and the others chuckled, some louder than others, some more cruel, because cruelty is contagious in places where insecurity hides behind wealth, and soon one man, a young VP with slicked hair and the smugness of inherited privilege, deliberately tipped his empty coffee cup to the floor and nudged it toward the janitor with his polished shoe, sneering, "Clean it up before it stains the carpet," and the board erupted into laughter again, the kind that wasn't truly funny but infectious in its malice, bouncing off the walls like shards of broken glass, and through it all the janitor, Ethan, moved with a calmness that seemed almost unnatural, bending down, his face unreadable, his hand steady as he retrieved the cup, his other hand brushing almost imperceptibly along the hidden edge of the conference table where he knew, because he had studied it in silence for months, the control panel for the company's secure presentation system was tucked, his fingers gliding over the familiar grooves of buttons that he had once designed himself, because Ethan was no ordinary janitor, no ordinary man, he was the ghost of their past sins, the shadow of their greed, the forgotten architect of the very digital fortress they believed kept their empire safe, a fortress he had built line by line of code, firewalls and encryptions that had once been hailed as unbreakable until Atlas itself broke him, cast him aside, stripped his name from patents and projects, buried him under non-disclosure agreements and blacklisted his career until the genius who had created their security was reduced to scrubbing their floors in silence, a humiliation they assumed he accepted because he was too weak to fight back, but what they didn't see, what they could never imagine, was that every night, after the board had gone home, after the city lights blurred into the fog and silence crept through the hallways, Ethan had been mapping every corner of their kingdom, memorizing every password typed too hastily, every careless conversation about illegal deals that spilled across polished floors while he scrubbed quietly, every file they thought was secure as they left laptops open while dismissing him as invisible, until his mind was a vault heavier than theirs, a weapon sharper than any lawsuit, and now, on this morning, with their laughter burning around him like wildfire, he was ready to light the match that would consume their empire. The CEO, a man with graying temples and the permanent scowl of someone who had never been told no, leaned back in his chair and sneered, "We should start charging him rent, he spends more time here than some of our VPs," and the laughter returned, but as they mocked, the projector at the head of the room flickered once, then again, subtle at first, as though the screen itself shivered with anticipation, and Ethan's eyes, cold, precise, unshaken, lifted for the first time to meet the CEO's, just for a heartbeat, long enough to freeze the man's smirk, before the screen behind him erupted into life, not with the sanitized quarterly reports they had prepared, not with the graphs carefully massaged to hide losses, but with a cascade of files spilling open one after another like dominoes, confidential contracts flashing across the glass wall-sized screen, offshore bank accounts tied to shell companies, emails laced with bribes and threats. Even internal memos that joked about regulators being too stupid to catch them, each document projected in sharp black and white clarity for every horrified executive to see, their faces draining of color as realization struck that this was not a glitch, not a hacker from the outside, but something far more terrifying, an inside job they had never anticipated. Chaos erupted instantly, chairs screeching back, voices shouting over one another, "Shut it down. Cut the feed. Disconnect the system." But laptops slammed with rejection messages, passwords failed, tablets froze, Every desperate command met with the same response on their glowing screens: access denied, and in the eye of their storm Ethan stood silently, mop in hand, the calm architect of their unraveling, his eyes reflecting the flames of their panic. The CFO, sweat dripping down his forehead, lunged toward the control panel, but Ethan was already there, his calloused hand resting gently on the button that controlled the system, and when the CFO's trembling fingers reached for it, Ethan simply shook his head once, slow, deliberate, the gesture of a man who held absolute power, and the room stilled for half a heartbeat, long enough for Ethan to finally speak, his voice low but carrying like thunder across the marble chamber. "I didn't miss a spot." "You did." Confusion rippled, then horror deepened as the files spread beyond the boardroom, screens in the lobby, in the offices, in the cafeterias all flickering to life, employees everywhere pausing mid-task to stare at the rot of their leadership revealed in damning clarity, whispers swelling into roars as phones buzzed with alerts, tweets exploded into the world outside, news feeds lit up like wildfire, and Atlas's fortress of secrecy, carefully guarded for decades, crumbled in seconds under the weight of truth unleashed. The CEO slammed his fist on the table, roaring, "Do you know what you've done?" his voice cracking with rage and fear, but Ethan only straightened, leaning his mop gently against the table as though he had finally set down a burden, his eyes unblinking, his words measured, "Yes. I cleaned up." And in that instant, as alarms blared in distant offices, as the city outside began to turn its gaze upward at the collapsing titan, as board members fumbled with phones only to find networks dead and emails disabled, they realized too late that the man they had mocked, the man they had dismissed as nothing, was the one who had held the power all along, and their empire was gone, not in years, not in months, but in seconds, erased by the janitor they had scorned.